He said, if you come to me when you're weary and you're heavy burden, I will give you rest for your soul. There's a transaction that takes there.
Welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Conrad Weaver. I'm really glad you've joined us today. So today's episode, we're going to go deeper than we normally do. We're diving into the heart of healing, not just the body, but the mind and the spirit as well. My guest is Virginia Dixon. She is the founder of the Place of Rest and the creator of the REST Reconstitution Approach to healing. Virginia's work has impacted a lot of people, including our friend Maddie Fiorenza from the PTSD 911 documentary film. On the show today, she explains why rest is more than just sleep. It's a rhythm of life and a pathway to freedom. This conversation challenges some assumptions you may have about mental health, leadership, and what it really takes to heal. So stay tuned. I also wanted to let you know that we have more PTSD 911 documentary film screening events coming up this year. Check out the website for all the latest locations and the dates at ptsd911movie.com/screenings. And if you're near one of the upcoming locations, I would love to meet you. So check it out and come on out. On the site, you can also get information about booking a screening for your city. So go check it out today. Hey, thanks again for being here. And now here's my conversation with Virginia Dixon. Well, Virginia, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the program today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I love your work.
Well, thank you so much. I've heard so much about you from our mutual friend, Maddie Fiorenza, and he's the one that made the connection for me. And doing some research, just looking into what you're doing I think there's a lot of things that we can collaborate in. So I'm excited to learn more, and for my listeners to learn about what you're doing and the work that you're doing. So tell us a little bit about you and what your organization does.
I'd like to begin by saying that I believe profoundly from experience, lived experience, observed experiences, and serving as a director of inner healing and spiritual formation at a very large functional medical integrative medicine clinic here in Southern Orange County. I am persuaded beyond a single shadow of a doubt that the mental health care crisis that is upon us is at the root of the physical and mental health care crisis that we are facing. So the whole Make America Healthy movement, regardless of political ideology, is imperative to save our lives. So I'm very much in that. I think we can do better because if we're talking about the mind, for example, Conrad, a person is a triune being, regardless of religious dogma or ideations. And a person is a spirit that works through a soul and a body. And first responders specifically have been in the presence of people that die and a lot of death. And you see something leaving. Well, that spirit has a mass. As a matter of fact, it's been weighed by science. And it has a mass. The spirit of a man is a thing. I call it a sphere of government, a sphere of influence. The second sphere of influence is the soul, the mind, the heart, the will, the conscience of a man. That soul is a sphere of influence. And then the consequence of what's happening in that, the spiritual information system, how the soul process it, or the psychology of a man, the mind, the heart, the will, the conscience, the feelings of a man process it, has consequences in the third sphere of influence, which is the body. So by the time we deal with disease states, whether it's PTSD or cancer, autoimmune diseases, to me, the structure is the same. The healing matrix is all the same because it's all rounded around universal principles that human beings are a spirit that are working through a soul in a body. But the particularities and the specifics of the constitution of those kingdoms, if you will, or those realms of information, if you will, are very, very important in the healing model. But in the current diagnose, treat, and cure model, which I am particularly interested is afflicting not just the general population, but our first responders specifically, is a deep conviction to me because their trauma and their experiences are so much compounded by our own. Look what we experienced last week. You talk about global and international shock, right? Why? Because the universal principle of life, the advancement of life, was violated. And something, even if you didn't agree with Charlie Kirk or whatever, you saw that something sacred pierced the veil of reality of humanity, perhaps, between maybe those information systems, if you will. And something jolted everybody with a pulse, no matter what side you're on. I don't like to talk in terms of sides anymore. I like to talk about these universal principles, because the universal principle that unites us all is life and the desire to expand life. Anything that diminishes that is a violation of this universal principle that we all share. So it injures us. So the classical model, I think, deals with just the body, the diagnose, treat, and cure, and here's the pill. And it's omitting these other spheres of influence, these other kingdoms, these other information, realms of information, if you will, that are vitally important to understand to heal the whole person. So when I met Maddie, he broke down and cried in my office, but he was easy for me because I thought, oh, I know exactly what to do. There's a breakdown in communication between these information systems, and I know exactly what to do. I have biometrics, I have modalities, but most importantly, I have REST, the Reconstitution Approach to Healing, and I can empower him and teach him how to heal from the inside out. Sorry for that. That gives you kind of a background on me.
There's a lot of places we can go with that. I want to ask you this. Do you think that our focus on the body, the physical body, and we give medicine for everything that hurts, is a result of a lack of belief in the spirit and in the divine spirit?
Yes.
That we don't see that,
100%.
We don't experience that viscerally with our senses in a way. And for the humanistic mindset, it's just what we have here. We're made of protons and neutrons and cells and, things that are physical.
100%. And you said something that's really important, and words in my world become very important. Although I'm as sloppy as the next person and communicating effectively, but I don't know if it's a lack of belief. I think it's an ignorance. Ignorance is not an insult. When I say I'm ignorant about this matter, or there's a measure of ignorance, it's not intended as an insult. In fact, what it is, it's acknowledgement that perhaps we don't have all the information. So I think it's imperative at this juncture of history that we show up with curiosity and seek information. And we're going to have to learn and discipline ourselves to be quiet and ask questions of each other without becoming combative, because we all want the same thing. We want to expand life. We want to live free. We want to be good, see good, do good. The chaos that we're seeing on both sides think they're doing good, but there's this negligence to address the things that perhaps we're each ignorant about. And it's exactly what you said, the spiritual constitution of our anatomy. It's an information system. And we all need to become curious about that.
So how can you help people who have grown up in this system of just the physical being? How can we help educate them into this new dimension of spirit, that we are a spiritual being?
Conrad, I'm so happy you asked me that, because I was speaking to the anchor of the national desk in Washington, D.C., who is eager to engage me in a conversation about this. And in one word, and we're trying to always find language to do it better, but in one word, I invite those people into a place of rest, relational, emotional, and spiritual truth, so they can reconcile the confusion, chaos, and dis-ease among their own constitution, between their spirit, their soul, and their body. What's going on in the discourse, the dialogue taking on there? When those things come into alignment, we're able to show up with a lot more curiosity and much more compassion for one another. Why? Because we've had to realize and recognize and encounter the depravity within ourselves. Maddie and I have had significant conversations during dark junctures of his journey about that. And all of a sudden, the power wasn't in the seductions of things to medicate with outside of us. It's having the strength, the courage, and the framework to reconcile the conflicts within us. And we have a very specific framework. It's called REST, the Reconstitution Approach to Healing. And we help people reason and reconcile these, the conflicts they have within themselves using data-driven, evidence-based methods that give them an absolute transcript of the secrets that they're struggling with in the innermost workings of their heart. And that's really jolting, because all of a sudden, the complaints, the fear, the anger, the resentments, hard pause instantly. And the question goes with, how did you know that about me? Wow, I didn't realize that was still with me, or that was afflicting me. So that's our starting point. We invite people to reconcile, to understand the relationship, the emotional, the spiritual constitution within themselves. And then they can have a lot of thoughts and opinions, but they've got to embrace the truth of it. And that's what we do. In one word, I invite people to rest.
It seems like there's such a dichotomy between data, this empirical data, and the spiritual. How do you bring those two together to be in congruence?
Love that. There's a story we tell ourselves and a narrative we have about our individual lives. And in the case of first responders, they have some very real lived experiences that they're dealing with darkness in multiple realms, in the spiritual and the psychological and the soul of a man. And they're dealing with the depravity of the human condition and the reactivities of us as human beings and where it leads them. But they don't have a framework. They don't have a framework to reason and process. They don't have cubbyholes to manage and regulate all that information. I believe if they could hear, by example, this is the most practical way I do what you just asked me. I help them understand through some technology that we have that their body is carrying a narrative, a story, and it's very real from the experiences that they've had and the experiences that their moms and dads and ancestors have. We know that the psychology of the parents becomes the biology of the child. And that is deep, 3 and 4 generations deep. And that story is carried in the physiology, the anatomy of a person. And then we have another sphere, remember, of information system, if you will. That's just the body. And we have another information system, and that's in our soul, our mind, our heart, our will, our conscience, and our feelings. And by the way, feelings are not to be confused with emotions. Feelings are the internal function that helps us negotiate the two other realms, the spiritual realm and the natural experiences we have. So we can't confuse those. Feelings are internal. Emotions are feelings in motion. So we have all these stories we tell ourselves from legitimate experiences we have. But there's a conflict between that, believe it or not, and the stuff your body's carrying. Because you're carrying information from generational dynamics. In epigenetics, we really address that well. And I think epigenetics and the science of that helps us understand. But the disparity between the stories you tell yourself from the experiences you've had from your psychology, if you will, your soul, and the disparity between that and the stories that your body's carrying, the disparity between those two things, therein lies the anatomy of disease. Right? Because a house divided can't stand. So if you insist on telling yourself these stories, but your body, they're not consistent with what your body's carrying, right? Guess what? You're going to have a lot of confusion, chaos, and dis-ease. Sadly, the human spirit, the human soul, the heart of a man is depraved. So what do we do when we're ignorant about these things? We double down and we become dumbfounded by things we're experiences. So we, in a dumbfounded state, advocate the cause of the things that we know are the truth, which in fact are just our opinions, right? But what happens if we're ignorant and we're dumbfounded and we're in a stupor now about the things that dumbfounded us, and then we become stupid. stupid because we're in stupor. And if we double down on our ignorance, our dumbness, and our stupidity, what happens? Then we become fools. And that is a lot of the discourse that we're hearing pertaining to many very serious issues, political, economics, certainly in the field of mental health. And you see the divide that we're having. When a basic law of nature was violated, an innocent life was taken doing what he does for a profession, which is debate. So whether you like Charlie or not, it doesn't matter. A human being has a liberty in this country to engage each other in debate. But when there's a generation that's deeply fractured, fragmented, in a state of confusion, chaos, and disease, you can see that it leads to what? Disease. If the confusion, chaos, and dis-ease is not mitigated by way of conversation, vigorous debate, things like what we're engaging in right now, what happens? Then we go into a state of disease, illness, and natural death. So the death of what happened, nothing really happened. It just manifested in the physical realm, on a stage in Utah. What's really happening to us privately, if we don't mitigate the conflict we're individually experiencing within ourselves, and we can't engage in honest dialogue with each other, and in some forums debate, then we'll slowly die. So this First Amendment is bigger than my rights. It is a law of nature woven within the anatomy of every man, that he is wired and predestined, right, to do what? To engage in this discourse about his perspective, his opinions. And we need to engage each other in pursuit of one thing, truth. Truth. Truth advances or diminishes. Somebody said, how do you know when you find truth? Well, truth either advances or diminishes life. You found truth when it's something that advances the life of what? Of the individual. So we need to show up to these conversations about mental health and the mess that things are in with a measure of integrity without attacking each other. And I think REST is the most productive, instructive, scientific, by the way, and legitimate, if I'd be as bold as to say legitimate point of contact to engage each other in these conversations. As an atheist, what compelled me to the Christian faith, that there was only one living human being in history, and it was the person, the historic Christ, Jesus of Nazareth. So the gift of rest, the promise of rest came from him. Because he said, if you come to me when you're weary and you're heavy burden, I will give you rest for your soul. There's a transaction that takes there. There's a transaction, but it's more than a transaction. The transaction comes from us, but the transformation comes from him. So there's a transformational decision, conversation that happened at that juncture in these ancient documents. But billions of people bear witness to the truth of that transformation. The transaction comes from us. We've got to come with bended knees and humility saying, okay, I've tried being a God unto myself. I've exhausted all my resources, but now I see my own limitations, the depravity of my human condition. Would you come, if you're really there, and make me whole? And then he promises what, Conrad? Freedom, freedom.
When you read that, or when you quoted that scripture, Jesus said that I will give you rest, it's for your soul. That's deep. Rest for the soul. When you think about that, that's your mind, your will, your emotions, all the things that those inner parts of us that he gives the rest for.
Yes. I'm glad you caught that, because rest is a rhythm that sustains life. You go to the doctor and what do? They take your history, and then they ask you a bunch of questions because they need to understand how you've governed your life, what governs your life, who governs your life, how you govern your life, right? Why? He's trying to educate himself, you, and everybody. The thing I love about rest and inviting people into this place of rest is that when you leave that doctor's office, the most consistent word, phrase, universally used is what?
Rest.
Go home and get some rest.
Yep.
They're just addressing your body.
Mm-hmm.
In the 5, 10, 15 minutes, if you're lucky, that they give you, they know absolutely nothing about the spiritual constitution of your worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And that's super important because that is going to give them a glimpse into your soul, your mind, your heart, your will, your conscience, and your feelings that govern much of what's happening in your body.
Hmm. Wow. This is fascinating. I mean, you're spot on. The accuracy that you're talking about this stuff is really amazing. And I think it's going to be mind blowing for a lot of people who listen to this and who've never really thought about these things, who've only maybe, worked in the physical realm, to really dive into their own inner, because we all have thoughts. We all kind of think about ourselves, but we don't really think about that we're this triune person made of spirit, soul, and body. And if we bring that healing and you have that rest in the soul part of us, what it can do for the rest of us. I mean,
the number one word I hear when I sit with people in my office, it's a matter of fact, it's kind of been our banner. I didn't realize this is what I was doing. I didn't set out to do this. I don't set out to make bad people good. I set out to help people who feel like they're dead or lost. I help them be free. I like to liken rest as something that just opens the cages that you're in at whatever capacity you want to. I can open the cage for you, but I can't make you fly out. But I can show you where all the windows are in your temple. And it's fun and I love it. So the number one thing that people say after their first hour or 2-hour consultation is, wow, I feel hope. And it was interesting because I never thought of myself as somebody that gave others hope. I knew I gave them life and I knew it was transformative, but that word hope became really captivating to me. And that's been my client's gift to me. Universal, Conrad. And I think it goes to the point that you just mentioned. I think they feel hope because I show them there's absolutely nothing random about, first of all, they're not crazy. Secondly, they're not as sick as they think they are. And thirdly, the capacity to heal and live free belongs to 100% of the people I work with. 100%. I want to say this because healing is about freedom. We don't chase a cure because see, we all have an appointment with destiny. So it's futile to seek a cure. What I try to show them is the path to freedom. And I give them a matrix and I show them, I invite them to reason through these things that are transformative.
So how can we lead this conversation with, say, a sergeant with the police department who's seen the worst of humanity, who's jaded by all of that, who gives no credence to anything spiritual? How can we introduce that conversation to someone like that?
Well, when a person, and I hear that often, I'm not a spiritual person. I'm a pragmatist. It's a matter of fact, I don't believe in God. And I say, okay, well, this is good because I have clarity about where they stand. But there's a very common phrase, there's no atheists in foxholes. I remember when 9/11 happened, everybody was praying. And I thought, I remember saying, to a friend, I wonder who they're praying to and for what. So there's a vacuum in the soul of every man. There's a hole. And he'll never find peace until he becomes curious about the things of God. If that curiosity leads him to say, there's absolutely no God, I almost 100% of the time know there's a hardened heart there. Because they're committing a violation against themselves in saying that. There's a root of anger, unforgiveness, and bitterness. So a lot of these sergeants, God bless them, they have to deal with the worst of humanity. But when they look at humanity and the scope of humanity, they're omitting their own depravity. So I believe the transformation can happen, will happen, and we can turn this thing around in one generation, because I've seen the transformative power of rest. That's why the greatest leader that ever lived invited humanity to rest. And if you don't believe he was a leader, he was certainly the most controversial human being who ever lived. And he was unifying, by the way. The masses followed him. What became polarizing and divisive was what? A body of lies. Lies will always divide us. So if you're a sergeant and you have the them and us mentality, right there is part of the problem. No, it's just us and us mentality. The minute we start thinking of the narcissist, what's another? Bipolar, the narcissist, the schizophrenic, the dissociative person. The minute we start fragmenting and dividing, diagnosing, I will go as far as to say treating and trying to cure the peculiarities of our common depravity, that's when when social engineering begins to divide us and dehumanize us. And I believe that's in measure and in degree what's happened. We don't need a manual to diagnose the depravity of a human being. Although it has had some instructive benefits, the DSM, for a number of things, in my humble opinion, it's created more damage than good. Because we've systematically strayed from what's sacred about our common humanity. And that's the condition of the spirit of a man and the soul of a man. And that's because they've prohibited us for bringing what? Religion into the discourse. Well, here's a little challenge we have with that. That's a violation of a law of nature, because you don't want to discuss something because you don't give merit to the spiritual constitution of a man. That doesn't mean it's not true and it is not accurate and it is not real. It's a matter of fact. Science proves that when a man dies, there is a mass that leaves his body, and that is his spirit. If we don't have a working framework of what is sacred about the spirit of that individual, and we're not willing to engage in conversations, if you will, and in sometimes, like Charlie did, debates, then we're in a lot of trouble. But to that captain and those first responders, the people that are in charge of these first responders, I would simply say this. As an immigrant, I will tell you that what was most compelling and what made me fall in love with America is that this republic, it's not a democracy, is a republic, was established. It's a democratic republic that was established around the framework of ideas that preserved the civil liberties, the individuality of what? Of each person, and what is sacred about their common humanity. And no government had the right to infringe on that. If we lose sight of that universal principle of what's sacred about our common humanity, we're going to look at each other as they, them, instead of as us. So I think there has to be a shift away, or an expansion, if you will, from the diagnose, treat, and cure model. And I just ask that perhaps they could just allow the conversation to expand beyond a doctor behind a pad that interviews one of these first responders that has a predictable condition, right? What's it called, Conrad? It's a predictable.
Well, the doctor will presume.
Presumptive. Right? Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
they become officers, firemen, border patrol. They become FBI agents with a presumptive knowledge that they will need care, psychological and structural. Well, what the hell happened to the spirit of that man that caused him to show up and engage Because it's the spirit of a man that causes him to engage in these vocations to do what? To do good and protect life. Mm-hmm. Well, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. So the very thing that drives them from here, we omit in the healthcare model. Mm-hmm. We omit discussing, addressing. And then when they come for care, we just treat their body and give them a pill. And what's worse is they are benched, shelved, and they're treated like criminals. An immigrant or a person on the street, any Tom, Dick, or Harry gets better care than our veterans do. And then our first responders do. And that's what I find completely unacceptable. And that I think I like an opportunity to be part of the solution. I think together, if we can just lock arms and not see each other as a threat to each other, there's more of us than the institutionalized them that want us to be puppets and turn against each other. There's more of us than them. But those of us in these primary spheres of influence, like these captains and everything, I think we need to take a shift. We need to have a shift in thinking. We can rest in the midst of horrific catastrophes. We can rest rest is a rhythm of life. But if we are not prepared to speak to power and to speak to institutionalized sickness or institutionalized confusion, chaos, and dis-ease that's become a disease and an illness that is upon us, and if we don't engage in these arena of ideas, it's going to be the death of us. Which is the beauty about the place you and I find ourselves in, okay? We're there. But that's okay because we don't want to die. We want to live. So this is forcing us to have these uncomfortable conversations that you and I wouldn't have had 20 years ago.
So what practices can I do to become more self-aware of my spiritual being?
Become curious about the existence of God. Charlie maybe was sloppy at times. We watched the boy grow up from 18 to 31 years old. But he launched a global movement. And you got to understand that there's universal principles that govern your life. You got to ask yourself, who or what is governing me? Am I violating my conscience in the decisions that I make because I was offended at a church? That's why I never want to set foot in church again. Did I engage in so much depravity that I think I'm never going to be good enough to be free or be saved? I don't deserve it. Or do I think, screw religion, screw God, I'm going to become a law unto myself? As a first responder, you have a real problem because this form of civil government was made for moral and religious people, said Adams. These are great thinkers of philosophy, theology, history, science. The framers of our Constitution were not people like us. They had a different root system. They had a different heritage that's been greatly diluted over these last 200 years. But what's not been diluted or compromised is our individual capacity to rise up and say no more. Wait a minute. I don't like Virginia. I don't like what she said, but there's a few seeds of a few ideas that make sense. So I would invite those people to, number one, ask themselves who and what is governing them. Number two, recognize that in that conversation they just had about who and what is governing them, there's a reality of the spiritual realm that's informing that decision. Are the voices you're hearing accusing voices of you? Or those are intrusive voices of something dark that is accusing you and diminishing you? Or are the voices that you're hearing, I tried that. That didn't work for me. So then you became a law unto yourself. You became God in your own life. That's never going to work for you. If you don't see that the ultimate first responder is God, and you're made in his image, and your curiosity about God and about yourself and about your very constitution doesn't lead you to a place of humility, then there's a root of bitterness and unforgiveness. But I would encourage them to listen to a lot of the debates that this 18-year-old to 30, the career of Charlie Kirk, and he engaged people in a debate. I'm not saying you have to like him. I'm not saying you have to agree, but his desire, knowing him, is that people would engage in these ideas and become curious about those things. But the ultimate act of unfailing love was our Father, our Abba, our Papa, our Dad, our Creator, God, that knows us by name and has every hair of our head numbered. And he calls us into communion with him. And it's so beautiful because he gave his son. So it's this parable, it's this beautiful story you see repeated, right? Throughout time and throughout history, because it's a law of nature. When we give our life, we'll gain things beyond our comprehension. We got to stop looking at each other as adversaries. We're not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we can come into rest. And that's where the healing happens.
It's the only path to rest. Doesn't mean we have to agree, by the way, right?
Right.
We can have honest discourse, but we can't walk away thinking, wow, Conrad gave me a lot to think about, or Virginia gave me a lot to think about.
Virginia, this has been a really deep and fascinating conversation. And I would love to at some point sit down with you in person and talk more about these things. But how can people learn more about what you do, and how can they get in touch with you?
Theplaceofrest.com. There's a website, there's questionnaires, there's some free information on there, but you can reach our office. Rest and Recover America is a campaign that we launched this year in honor of our first responders and to show up for this conversation in the mental health care space. So Rest and Recover America, you can get to that through through the first website I mentioned. While we experience much of the things that you and I are talking about, our first responders are facing that day in and day out. I wrote something here that impacted me. I never put it on paper. The complexities of the times in which we find ourselves are tough for us as individuals. But I want everybody to stop and think for a minute how they compound for our first responders, because they take the calls and they answer the call. I'm recognizing the complexities and what a mess the mental health care space becomes, and they cannot wait the time they're being asked to wait to receive the help they need.
Virginia, thank you so much for your time today, for being on the program, for sharing your wisdom, and thank you for working with Maddie. He speaks so highly of you, and I know the work that he's done with you has been transformative for him.
Thank you so much, Conrad. God bless you.
Thanks so much for listening to this important conversation with Virginia Dixon. I hope her insights on healing the spirit, soul, and body have given you a fresh perspective on wellness and leadership. Check out the show notes for links to her website, The Place of Rest. And if today's episode helped you, share it with a friend or a leader on your team. And finally, please remember that you are not alone. And if you need someone to turn to talk to, and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.